Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Wool and Hearth podcast. My name's Diane, and today's episode is going to be diving into herbs and flowers. We talked about garden planting and planting vegetables recently, and some of the same rules apply for flowers and herbs, but today's episode is going to be all about that. So grab your favorite mug and join me by the hearth. So herbs and flowers, gardening with beauty and color and medicinal properties. Similar rules apply when you're planting gardens for herbs and flowers, but there are some different considerations. So we're gonna go through some of those and hopefully give you a little bit of food for thought on planting and which flowers or herbs you're interested in. So let's get started. So as I said, there are similar rules. So whether you're going to be planting in containers or planters, or whether you're planting directly in the ground, you're going to still plant seasonally for your location. I think there's a little bit more design involved if you're planting flowers and herbs because, some flowers are really tall. And so you'd want to plant those maybe more in the back so you can see the shorter flowers or herbs in the front. And also a lot of people like to plant so they have flowers like all season long. So if you start in the spring, you can have things like daffodils and crocus and tulips, typical Easter sort of flowers. And then as you head into summer and fall, you might have things like foxgloves or lupine or zinnias, cosmos, those kinds of things. And then as you head into fall, you might have like autumn sedum is one that my mom has around her bird bath. It's completely green in summer, and then the closer it gets to fall, it turns like this. It turns pink and then like a dark pink. And then by the time fall hits and it's starting to die off, it's like this really deep, deep pink color. It's a huge, huge plant for pollinators, butterflies, bees. I mean, they are all over it summer long. So, if you're designing your garden, a lot of people design it that way so that you do have flowers consecutively throughout the season. And the next thing would be, what kind of plants do you want? What types of herbs do you want? There's going to be a little bit of overlap here when you're looking at culinary and medicinal herbs. They're used for both in a lot of different ways. And just so that you know, I'm not a registered herbalist. I'm not going to be diving into medicinal properties of herbs, especially not in this particular episode, but I am not a registered herbalist and I'm not a doctor, and I'm not going to be giving any medical advice about what you can do with herbs. But there's a lot of crossover between culinary and medicinal herbs, so you can plant them for both and get dual purpose use out of them. Same thing with flowers. You can have decorative, medicinal, pollinator friendly flowers. And again, there's a lot of crossover there. The other big consideration when you're looking at what types of plants to get or seeds to buy, you're going to want to figure out whether you want annual plants or perennials. Things like marigolds, zinnias, those are annuals and need to be planted every year. Where lavender, echinacea, hollyhocks, those are perennials. Hollyhocks, I think, are more like biennials, but they're in the ground all the time. So if you want to you can certainly do a combination. My mom's flower gardens have both. I would say mostly perennials at this point, but there are flowers that she buys and just to put in her planters out front every year. She loves geraniums, and so she usually buys some geraniums to put in her planters. But again, how much work do you want to do, and do you want this to be something you can enjoy year after year, and the design is what you want, and you're adding things or taking things away or switching out plants. But if you want something that's going to be seasonally blooming continuously, then perennials would be the way to go with that. So very similar to herbs to vegetables, you're going to consider sunlight, and most herbs seem to need at least 6 hours of sun per day, depending on, again, the kind of plant. But the nice thing about herbs and flowers is that if you're doing planters, they're easy to move to different locations. Vegetables can be very heavy in pots and things. And so, I think with herbs it's a little bit easier to move them around if you're not getting enough sunlight in one spot. But again, you would want to know where the best sun is on your property. The herbs are all going to be different, and so taking that into consideration, you're just going to want to plan like you would for your regular garden. You're going to want to keep an eye on where your sun hits. You're going to want to keep an eye on how much rain you're getting. Do you have gutters up? Do you have water that's pouring off your roof and hitting your garden bed? That's probably not the best spot for those, but you just want to know, like I said, how much sun you're getting. There are certain plants that actually like or need partial or full shade. So not everything needs, 12 hours of sun, but you're going to want to make sure you read the back of the seed packets or the instructions if you get plants from your local nursery. They're all going to be different. So again, I can't stress the importance of making sure you read the directions. Or if you already know and you're just buying extra plants, then that may not be relatable. But if you're buying something for the first time, just make sure you know what it actually needs. And then soil, a lot of herbs and flowers like well-draining soil. I think most plants generally do, but you're gonna want to know if you're planting in pots. Do they need amendments? How much fertilizer do they need and how often? You're going to need to water more if you're doing pots or planters. And um, a lot of herbs do like to dry out, but again, it's going to depend on the herb and the flower, and you're going to want to keep that in mind. But pots do dry out faster. There's no doubt about it, especially if you have like clay pots, those dry out very fast. So it's just something, again, to keep in mind. Then if you're adding amendments, whether it's compost or like coconut coir or blood meal, or, there's so many different ways you can amend the soil, but you're going to want to know what your plant wants. Do they like acidic soil? Do they like more alkaline soil? Are they heavy feeders? Are they not heavy feeders? All of these things play in, and it's just really important to know what each variety of plant needs. And I know it sounds like the common thread here, but it really is important. As we said with watering, a lot of things don't like wet feet. They like to dry out. Flowers may need more water, especially when they're blooming. Herbs may as well, but again, you'll want to make sure that you're not overwatering because they will die out quickly. All right. So let's go into some common herbs, kitchen herbs that you might see that you might have on your shelf now that you could grow in your garden. Rosemary is a big one. It has antimicrobial and immune boosting properties. And I believe, I've never tried to grow a rosemary, but I believe that it likes a lot of heat. I don't know that it would do well overwintering, but you could probably take it inside. I've never tried to grow it, but I believe that it does like heat for growing purposes. Sage is a common one that's also used medicinally. Garlic is one of the oldest herbs, and I'm pretty sure everyone has that in their kitchen. You can grow it. You can overwinter it, and it will grow back in the spring. What happens is when you have the head of garlic, you can't really use garlic that you would buy at the store for it, but if you buy it from a seed company, you basically break up the head of garlic into individual cloves, and that's how you plant it. You plant each individual clove into the ground. I believe it's a little tip up, facing up, but again, it will give you directions if you purchase it from and it will start to grow, it'll start to set, and you'll get a little green shoot at the top, and then you'll mulch it, you'll overwinter it, and in the spring you'll get the lovely garlic scapes. Once those die off, you can pull the garlic out and harvest it. It really is actually very easy to grow, and you get a lot of garlic. They may not be as big as the bulbs in the grocery store, depending on what kind of garlic you get, but it's very easy to grow. Mint, thyme, chives, parsley, and basil are all common kitchen herbs that you could grow in either a pot or a bed. Mint is very invasive, so a lot of people say not to grow it in your garden bed to do a pot instead. I have not had much luck with mint, mainly because my cats love mint, and every time I try to plant it, whether it's in a pot or in the ground, they pull it up and roll all over it, and I am left with no mint. But it is one of the plants that's very invasive, and so if you're going to grow it, a lot of times people recommend using a pot. Parsley and chives will overwinter. My mom has grown chives and parsley in her garden bed for years, and they come back every spring. And as I said, we live in the Northeast, so it can, get below zero. And she doesn't actually mulch or anything. She just leaves them and they come back every year. So, there is a little bit of play as far as what you do and your location. Not everything needs to be baby. Let's move on to pollinator friendly plants and flowers. So, for the kitchen herbs, thyme, mint, oregano, chives, sage, coriander, fennel, those are all and basil, if I didn't say that, those are all pollinator friendly. And we want pollinators. And if you're gardening, I'm sure you already know this, but we want pollinators. We want the butterflies, we want the bees, we want the even the wasps to some degree. You want all of these things to come into your garden because they're going to, yes, they're going to pollinate your plants, but they're part of the ecosystem. It's important that they're here. They have a reason for being. And so whatever we can do to encourage them and to bring them back into your growing space, the better everything is going to be for everyone involved and for your plants. So some of the flowers and herbs would be bee balm. Lemon balm is especially a good one. Borage, if you've never grown it, it's these little purple flowers. They're fuzzy, and you can put them in water. They're edible, but the bees love it. Same with dandelions, and I know people are going to say dandelions, especially maybe if you live in a homeowners association or anywhere. I mean, people complain about dandelions, but dandelions in the spring are one of the very first things that bees get for food. After a long winter, especially here, they're looking for something to eat, and the dandelions are one of the very first things that comes out. So I really, really recommend not spraying your dandelions with pesticide and weed control because the bees need them. And, is it really hurting you to have little yellow flowers scattered around your yard? Probably not. But it helps your pollinators, and I can't stress that enough. Autumn sedum, like I was talking about before, is a huge pollinator attracting plant. It's absolutely beautiful, but like I said, the butterflies and the bees love it. Sunflowers, zinnias, milkweed, marigolds, yarrow, cosmos, snapdragon. I mean, there's so many of them. And depending, again, where you live and what kind of climate you're in is gonna, change a little bit what you can grow and what kind of pollinators you have and what grows best in your area for them. But just really, it's something to really consider when you're planting your herb gardens because we do need them. And going along with that, if you're planting for your pollinators, we want to encourage your native plants. We want to encourage the native pollinators and not bring in plants that are going to be invasive, plants that that could really hurt your local ecosystem. The other thing to keep in mind with the pollinators and being pollinator friendly is placing things throughout your garden, not just plants, but maybe, like bowls of water with pebbles in it, or like the little worker bee houses, or logs, or things that they can use to rest, to get water, things that are going to make it a whole environment, not just, okay, well, we're here, we're going to get our nectar and leave, but you want them to also bloom in your garden. You want the ecosystem to thrive with them in your garden. So just keep those kinds of things in mind when you're planting and you're planning your garden because it doesn't take very much space and it doesn't take really any more time, but it's really life-saving for those pollinators. So I know this was kind of a quick podcast episode, but that's just some things to think about when you're planting herbs. I struggle with herbs and flowers, especially starting them from seed. And so this is This is something that I am continually trying to work on. Some of the plants that I want to grow, like marshmallow and yarrow and what was the other one? Hollyhock. Like those kinds of things do need to be stratified, which means they need like a cold um like period of dormancy, and then you put them out in the spring and it actually helps them germinate better. But I really do struggle with herbs and flowers, so it's my constant struggle. But hopefully this gave you some ideas. And as always, I'd love to know what you're growing. If there are, herbs that you can't stand and you would never grow, or if there's herbs that are super easy for you to grow, or flowers that are easy for you to grow. And as always, I'd love to know where you're located. So, like I said, hopefully this was helpful and it gave you some ideas. Next week we are going still sort of in the um, gardening frame of mind, but we're going to take a little bit of a step sideways and go into homesteading. And we're going to talk about what homesteading is and are you a homesteader? And what makes a homesteader? Is it exactly what you think? So hopefully you join us. If you're not interested in homesteading, we'll be back into knitting in a couple of episodes. If we don't see you, then hopefully you join back for that. Until then, happy knitting, friends.